David Morgan always knew when Catherine was lying. Her upper lip twitched slightly, and her gaze fixed somewhere over his left shoulder. 13 years together, and that little detail had never changed. "Late tonight," she said, gathering her hair into a sloppy bun in front of the hallway mirror. "A client from Chicago wants to review the entire campaign." Her lip trembled. A glance slid over her shoulder. "Sure," David smiled, leaning against the door jamb. "Should I make you dinner when you get back?" "No need. I'll eat there with the crew." She used to call. She used to text. She used to apologize for work delays. Now it's short notices dropped in passing between sips of morning coffee, or as now, with her hand already on the doorknob. When a stranger's car picked her up from their 2-story house in suburban Chicago, David didn't immediately return to his office. He stood in the hallway, looking at the wedding photo on the wall. Catherine, in an ivory dress, was laughing, looking directly into the camera, and he was looking only at her. 40 years old for him, and his eyes in the photo like a teenager in love. There was nothing unusual about their story. They met at a party of mutual friends. 2 dates later, he realized he was missing. Proposal, wedding, buying a house in the suburbs. They were building a life by the book. Right, consistent. And then life stopped following the pattern. 4 years ago, they tried to have a baby. Month after month, tests, doctor's visits. The frustration ate away at them from the inside out. Catherine cried when she thought he couldn't see. David pretended not to notice her red eyes in the mornings. Medical reports showed no problems with either of them. Unexplained infertility was what the doctors called it. After the 3rd failed IVF treatment, they decided to pause. The pause dragged on, turned into a silent agreement. They never tried again. That's when the first crack appeared. David's workday began with a meeting on the quarterly report. He looked at the graphs and figures, but saw only her face, her lip, her gaze. Something had happened in the last 2 months. Something important. Catherine was constantly late, taking work home, spending weekends at her laptop. She answered his questions briefly, without her usual detailing. Texted someone late at night, smiling at the phone screen, but as soon as he got close, the screen went out. When David returned home, the house greeted him with silence. 3 years ago, he had set up an office for Catherine on the 2nd floor, a large desk by the window, an ergonomic chair, comfortable shelves, everything to make it comfortable for her to work from home. For the past few months, the room had been empty. The refrigerator held containers of food he'd prepared over the weekend. Catherine hardly touched them. "Lunch with coworkers," she said. The jackets and dresses he'd given her for anniversaries hung untouched. In their place, she wore new things he hadn't seen before. Warming up dinner, David pulled out a laptop. The newly installed GPS tracking program kicked in, showing a red dot on the city map. The office of the PR agency where Catherine worked was located in the business center. The dot was flashing in a completely different neighborhood, closer to the university campus. Strangely, it was only now that he was starting to notice these details. It was like seeing road signs he'd driven past hundreds of times but never read. Catherine was changing passwords on her devices, going into the other room when the phone rang, came home smelling of a different perfume. David replayed the last few weeks of their life together in his head, trying to find the moment when it all went wrong. 3 years ago, he and Catherine had taken a trip to Italy, a last-ditch attempt to restart their relationship after the pregnancy debacle. He remembered them sitting in a small restaurant in Verona, and her laughing at his attempts to pronounce the name of a dish. Her eyes had shone like they had the first year they'd known each other. Then there was a period of recovery. They started talking again, sharing the news of the day, planning weekends together. But at some point, Catherine again began to distance. At first, imperceptibly. More time spent with friends, enrolled in photography courses, yoga. Then it became more and more obvious. The red dot on the screen moved. A restaurant in the university district. Expensive place, according to the reviews. Not the kind of place one usually went to with coworkers after work. David closed his laptop and went upstairs. Their bedroom held traces of Catherine's morning presence, the forgotten scarf on the chair, the open bottle of perfume he walked over to her dressing table, where dozens of jars and tubes stood. Once he had known the purpose of each, night cream, eye serum, tonic. Now half of them were unfamiliar. In the top drawer of the dresser were her papers, passport, insurance, bank statements. David thumbed through the papers, not knowing what he was looking for. Restaurant bills. They hadn't been there together. Hotel receipts. In a city where, as far as he knew, there were no PR conferences. A receipt for jewelry, not from him. The phone in his pocket vibrated. Running late, don't wait up. A short message, without the usual emoji, without a kiss at the end. Sure, David replied aloud to the empty room. Back in his office, he pulled out the bottom drawer of his desk. There, beneath the folders of financial reports, lay a pistol. A small Glock he'd bought 2 years ago after a series of robberies in their neighborhood. Catherine had been against guns in the house, but had agreed when he'd promised to keep it locked up. David twirled the cold metal in his hands, feeling its heaviness, then put it back away and locked the drawer. The clock on the wall read 9 p.m. when he heard the sound of the door opening. Quick footsteps down the hall, the rustle of a coat being removed. "David?" Her voice sounded surprised, as if she hadn't expected him home. "In the kitchen," he said, closing the laptop. She came in, flushed from the cold wind, with a light scent of wine. "You're late," David remarked, sliding a cup of hot tea toward her. "Told you it was going to be a busy day." "With a client from Chicago?" "Yes." She averted her gaze, redesigning the whole concept from scratch. He brought the cup to his lips, taking a sip. "At an Italian restaurant near the university?" A pause, just for a second, but he noticed. "What?" "No, we were in the office the whole time." Her upper lip trembled. "I see," David smiled. "Just a bug in the app, I guess." "What app?" Her voice grew cooler. "Never mind." He stood up from the table. "The bath is ready for you if you want to relax after a hard day." David could see the confusion on her face, but she quickly pulled herself together and smiled, a smile that he used to think was genuine. "Thank you. You're always so thoughtful." Later, when she fell asleep, he took a long look at her face in the semi-darkness of the bedroom. 10 years of marriage, 13 years together. Could people become strangers while continuing to sleep in the same bed? David gingerly picked up her phone from the bedside table. It was blocked. He used to know her password. She'd told him it herself. "In case something happens to me, you should have access to all accounts." Now the screen required a fingerprint. In the morning, Catherine left earlier than usual. For the second time in a week, she called a cab instead of having him drop her off at the office on his way to work, as she had before. Half an hour later, David dialed her office number. "Good morning, Horizon PR Agency, how can I help you?" came the cheerful voice of the receptionist. "Hello, this is David Morgan. I need to reach Catherine, but she's not answering her cell phone. It's urgent." "Oh, Mr. Morgan. Unfortunately, Catherine's not in the office today. She's taking the day off." Silence on the phone. He squeezed the phone so hard that the plastic case rattled. "Is that so? That's odd. She drove to work this morning. Perhaps she has meetings with clients outside the office?" the girl suggested uncertainly. "Yeah, I guess so. Thank you." David hung up the phone and stared out the window for a long time. Cars drove by, people hurried to work, an ordinary day, for everyone but him. Because today he knew for sure, his wife was lying to him. He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a small black box. A listening device, purchased over the internet a week ago. David never thought he would have to use such methods. There used to be no secrets between them. He used to believe every word she said. In the evening, Catherine came home with a bouquet of lilies, her favorite flowers, but he hadn't bought them. "From coworkers," she smiled, intercepting his gaze, "for the successful completion of the quarterly project." David nodded and continued chopping vegetables for the salad. Tonight, he decided to have dinner at home, just like old times. He opened the wine they'd brought back from Italy. They'd promised to drink it on their 10th anniversary, but for some reason, they kept putting it off. "How was your day?" he asked when they sat down at the table. "Usually," she shrugged. "Nothing special." "And the day off yesterday? Did you have a good rest?" Catherine froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. "What day off?" "Your secretary said you weren't in the office yesterday." "Oh," she set her fork aside. "Yes, of course, I went to see my mom. She wasn't feeling well." David nodded slowly, taking a sip of wine. I'm surprised you didn't tell me. I figured I wouldn't bother you. I know how busy you are right now with the new project. He watched her cut the steak into neat little slices. Always so methodical, his Catherine. Always everything in order. Everything by the book. He used to admire that trait of hers. Called your mom today, David said, watching her. She didn't pick up. Their gazes met over the table. For the first time in a long time, he saw something familiar in her eyes, something from the old Catherine. Fear. She's probably been to the doctor. Her voice sounded steady, but the hand holding her glass trembled slightly. Probably, he agreed. Do you want to tell me what's going on, Kat? What's going on? About you coming back late. The weekends I don't remember on your schedule. The smell of someone else's cologne on your clothes. David, you're scaring me. She shook her head. Are you following me? Should I be? No. She stood up abruptly from the table. I'm not going to make excuses for my job and my life. If you're paranoid, it's not my problem. Paranoia, he repeated the word, as if tasting it. Maybe. Or maybe it's just that I'm finally starting to see what's going on in front of me. David stood up as well and walked over to her. Gently, he put his hands on her shoulders, the way he'd done before when he wanted to comfort her. Kat, whatever is going on, we can fix it. Just tell the truth. For a moment, he thought she was ready to open up. Something akin to regret flashed in her eyes. But the moment passed, and she pulled away. There's nothing to say, David. It's all right. You're just working too hard and making up problems where there aren't any. That night they slept in separate rooms, for the first time in 10 years of marriage. The morning she left, he sat in his office, staring at his computer screen where a red dot of GPS beacon was moving from their house in the direction opposite her office. The dot stopped outside an apartment building in a respectable neighborhood. David wrote down the address and closed the program. He ignored the call from his supervisor. He had more important things to do today than work. Parking 2 blocks from the address, David put on his sunglasses and got out of the car. The day was clear and cool, perfect for a walk. He walked leisurely down the street, looking at the houses and storefronts like an ordinary passerby with no particular purpose. House number 37 looked modern and expensive. Concierge at the entrance, 24-hour security. David watched from across the street, sipping coffee from a paper cup. At 10:45, Catherine came out of the door. She wasn't alone. A tall, dark-haired man walked beside her. They weren't holding hands, but they were walking so close together that there was no doubt. These people were close. David felt his heart skip a beat and then beat with redoubled vigor. He'd been expecting this, prepared for it. But seeing with his own eyes turned out to be a very different experience. The man said something, and Catherine laughed, the same laugh that had previously been reserved for him. They got into the silver BMW and drove away. David didn't follow them. Instead, he walked up to the house and addressed the concierge. Good morning, I'm looking for my friend Michael. He recently moved here, but I lost his new address. Michael? The concierge gave him an appraising look. We have a few Michaels. Tall brunette, about 35, often wears blue shirts. Ah, Professor Foster from apartment 412. Yeah, he just moved in. That's right, the professor? David smiled. What university does he teach at? Chicago. Literature or something like that, I think. David thanked the concierge and walked back to his car. Michael Foster, professor of literature at the University of Chicago. Now the ghost had a name. In the evening, David greeted Catherine with a smile, cooked her favorite dish, opened the wine. He was the perfect husband, attentive and caring. He didn't mention his suspicions or this morning's surveillance. They talked about nothing. About the new movie, about weekend plans, about a possible summer vacation. It was like everything was the same, as if there wasn't a chasm of lies and betrayal between them. Later, when she was asleep, David pulled a gun out of his desk drawer and stared at it for a long time, then carefully put the weapon back. It wasn't time yet. He wanted to know everything first. For the next 3 days, David carefully documented Catherine's every move. He created a separate folder on his computer where he recorded the times she left the house. When she returned, all the places where the GPS beacon attached to her bag had stopped. David cross-referenced this data with the official schedule of her appointments he found in her email. It was surprisingly easy to crack the password. She was still using the date of their wedding with different variations. The results left no doubt. Out of 5 working days, 3 of them were spent in Michael Foster's apartment, or meeting him in various cafes and restaurants in the city. Official meetings with clients were often canceled or rescheduled, and her free time was not spent where she told her husband it would be. On Thursday afternoon, David parked in front of the University of Chicago's Humanities Building. He found Professor Foster's lecture schedule on the department's website. He was scheduled to finish at 4 o'clock today. David waited patiently, watching the stream of students leaving the building. Michael Foster showed up at 4:15. He looked even more confident in real life than he did from afar. Tall, with a slight carelessness in his clothes that must have seemed to the female students a sign of intellectual depth. He was carrying a leather briefcase and chatting with a young girl who looked at him with obvious adoration. David took a few pictures on his cell phone. When Foster said goodbye to the student and headed toward the parking lot, David followed him, keeping a safe distance. The professor got into the same silver BMW that David had seen earlier. 20 minutes later, the car pulled up outside a flower store. Foster got out and returned with a bouquet of white lilies, Catherine's favorite flowers. Something dark and heavy stirred in David's chest. So those lilies Catherine had brought home were from him. She hadn't even bothered to think of another story. That evening, while Catherine was taking a shower, David took advantage of the moment and picked up her cell phone. The device was locked, but notifications popped up on the screen. A message from MF. "Miss you. Regular time tomorrow?" A short reply from Catherine. "Can't wait." David carefully put the phone back down. His hands were shaking and his mouth was dry. This was even worse than he'd realized. This wasn't a casual fling, not a momentary weakness. This was a full-blown affair, planned and thought out, with regular times of meeting and obviously feelings. "Is everything okay?" Catherine stood in the bathroom doorway, wrapped in a towel with wet hair. "Of course," he smiled. "Just tired at work." "You poor thing." She walked over and kissed him lightly on the cheek. She smelled fresh and smelled like the expensive shampoo he hadn't bought her. "Maybe you should take a vacation. We could go somewhere. Just the 2 of us." The falseness in her voice rang like a cracked bell. David looked at her face, familiar down to the last freckle, and didn't recognize the woman in front of him. "That's a great idea." He hugged her, imagining the way Michael had hugged her. "We'll think of something for next month." David didn't sleep at night. He lay next to his wife and stared at the ceiling, going over his options. He could just walk away, pack up and disappear from her life, leave her a note and divorce papers, the civilized approach. But something inside him rebelled against such a decision. He wasn't ready to let her go, much less to another man. It would be possible to make a scandal, to say everything that accumulated, to throw in her face the evidence, to force her to confess to lies. But then, she would definitely go to Foster, and all those years together would just evaporate, turn into a bitter anecdote that she would tell to a new man. The next day, David called into work and took the day off. Instead of the office, he went to a gun store on the outskirts of town. The gun he had in his desk was officially registered, in his name. He couldn't take any chances. He bought a new weapon, a used revolver of .38 caliber, from an acquaintance of an acquaintance without documents or registration. When he returned home, he hid the weapon in the garage in a tin box of old tools. Then he stood under the shower for a long time, washing away the smell of gun grease and doubt. In the evening at dinner, he was especially attentive and gentle with Catherine. "Are you all right at work?" she asked, noticing his mood. "More than okay," David smiled. "There's a chance for a promotion next quarter, but it's a secret for now." "Really? That's wonderful." She raised her glass. "To your success." They clinked glasses, and for a moment it seemed to David that everything was as before, that they were just husband and wife, celebrating good news. But then he noticed her glance quickly at her watch, twice in the last 10 minutes. "In a hurry to get somewhere?" he asked casually. "What? No, just a habit. I thought maybe we could go to a movie. It's been a while since we've been out together." "Tonight?" Her confusion was obvious. I promised Sarah I'd help her with a presentation for a client. She's in a panic about the meeting tomorrow." I see. He continued to smile. Another time then? Catherine left at 8, kissing him goodbye. David waited 5 minutes, then got into his car and followed the cab she had hailed. As he had expected, it stopped outside Foster's house. David parked on the opposite side of the street and watched his wife enter the building. Soon a light came on in the windows of the 4th-floor apartment. Then the curtains were drawn. Something shivered inside him. Until that moment, there had always been a tiny hope that he was wrong, that this was all a figment of his imagination and paranoia. Now, the last illusion melted away. David sat in the car for 2 hours, keeping his eyes on the windows of the apartment. At one point, he noticed 2 figures. They moved behind the curtains, embracing. Their silhouettes merged into one, then disappeared from view. When David got home, he was shaking. He pulled a bottle of whiskey from the bar and drank 2 glasses in a row, unable to taste it. Then he opened his laptop and started looking up information on Michael Foster. Professor of American Literature, 34 years old, PhD from Princeton, teaching at the University of Chicago for 5 years. Publications in scholarly journals, excellent student reviews, divorced, no children. Social media pages are mostly devoted to work, conference photos, book quotes, speaking announcements. David delved further and further, clicking links, reading comments. In one of the photos, taken at a literary festival 6 months ago, he noticed a familiar face in the background. Catherine. So they hadn't met recently, as he'd assumed. Their affair had been going on for months. When Catherine got home, at 11:20, much earlier than he'd expected, David was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. She quietly undressed, showered, and lay down beside him. In the morning at breakfast, David decided to play the wager. How was Sarah? Did she do well with the presentation? Catherine was confused for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, we're all done. It should work. Good. He took a sip of coffee. I called her yesterday to see if she needed my help with the numbers for the presentation, but she didn't pick up. Catherine froze with toast in her hand. Did you call Sarah? Yeah, around 9 o'clock. Thought I might be able to help you both since it's a free evening. She slowly put the toast back on the plate. David, what's going on? That's what I'd like to know. He looked her straight in the eye. Where were you last night, Kat? I told you. With Sarah. No. David shook his head. You were with him. Michael Foster. The color drained from her face. You followed me? I had to. You gave me no choice. He clenched the cup so hard his knuckles turned white. How long has this been going on? Catherine stood up from the table, crossing her arms over her chest. It's none of your business. None of my business? His voice remained quiet, but a storm was brewing inside. You're my wife. 13 years together. How can it be none of my business? We're just friends. She looked away. Don't lie to me! He slapped his palm on the table, and the dishes bounced. I've seen you together. I saw you walk into his apartment. I saw your silhouettes behind the curtains. That's not friendship, Kat. She was silent for a few seconds, looking away. Then she said quietly, I've been meaning to tell you. I was just looking for the right moment. Tell me what? That you've been sleeping with another man for months? That I want a divorce? Her voice got stronger. I'm not happy with you, David. Not for a long time. The words hit harder than he expected. David felt something inside him break the last support, the last island of hope. Because of him? He asked in a muffled voice. No. Not only that, she shook her head. Our marriage was dead long before Michael. We were just pretending everything was okay. I never pretended. David stood up and walked over to her. I loved you. I still do. But I don't. She looked at him with pity, and that was the worst part. I'm sorry. David didn't go to work that day. He sat in his office, staring at one point while Catherine packed up her bedroom. She had said she was staying at Sarah's for a while until they worked out the division of property. He knew that was a lie. She would go to his place, Foster's. When she came out of the bedroom with the suitcase, David still sat motionless. I'll send for the rest of your things later, Catherine said from the doorway, and I'll contact you about the divorce papers. He didn't answer. She sighed and walked out, closing the door carefully behind her. always so thoughtful, his cat. David spent the next 3 days in a daze. He went to work, answered the phone, made appointments, all on autopilot. In the evenings, he sat in the empty house, drinking whiskey and revisiting old photographs. On the 3rd day, he noticed that he was talking aloud to the void, telling the absent Catherine about his day, asking her opinion, arguing with her. On Friday, a letter from Catherine's lawyer arrived in his email with a draft divorce agreement. Fair division of property, no claim for alimony. She was making good money on her own. Quick, clean, civilized. David printed out the document and put it on the kitchen table. Then he opened his laptop and checked the GPS beacon. Just as he thought, Catherine was at Foster's apartment. The red dot hadn't moved in 2 days. She lived there. As he stared at the screen, the phone vibrated. A message from Catherine. "Got the papers? They need to be signed by Wednesday." He didn't reply. Instead, he got up and went out to the garage. A tin toolbox stood on the top shelf. David pulled out a revolver, twirled it in his hands. The metal was cold and heavy. He woke up the next morning with a clear plan in his head. No more tossing and turning and no more doubts. He knew what had to be done. First, David called his banker and transferred most of his savings into a new account. Then he packed a few changes of clothes into a small bag. Papers, cash, chargers, everything he needed for a long absence. In a desk drawer, he found an old cell phone, an ordinary ringer with no GPS or internet. He charged it and inserted a new SIM card, bought for cash at the supermarket. Before leaving the house, David texted Catherine, "Come home tonight at 7. Need to discuss the papers in person, I promise, no scenes." She replied almost immediately, "Okay, I'll be there at 7. At work, he behaved as usual, saying goodbye to his colleagues until Monday. No one noticed anything unusual in his behavior. At 5 o'clock, David returned home and began preparations. First, he washed the house thoroughly as if he were preparing for important guests. Then he showered, put on a fresh shirt, shaved. He wanted to look good for his last meeting. In the drawer of his bedside table, he put the printed photographs of Catherine and Foster, pictures he'd taken himself during the stakeout. On the kitchen table, he left a bottle of wine, the same Italian wine from their last happy vacation. The revolver was in the pocket of the house robe that hung on a hook in the bathroom. David checked the cartridges, 6 pieces, a full clip. At 6:50, he heard the sound of a car pulling up. Not a cab, a private car. Perhaps Foster had given her a ride. David sat in the darkened living room and waited. At 6:55, the phone rang. Catherine. He didn't answer it. A minute later, a message came through. "I'm at the house. Where are you?" He still didn't answer. Let her come in herself. She still had the keys. The clock on the mantelpiece showed exactly 7 when the front door opened. Cautious footsteps were heard in the hallway. "David?" Catherine's voice sounded uncertain. "Are you home?" He remained silent, listening to her movements. The flick of a switch, a light in the hallway. "David?" He stood up and walked silently toward the bathroom. The robe still hung on the hook. The revolver was pulling away from his pocket. The cell phone rang in the kitchen. Not his, hers. She answered it. "Hi." Her voice changed immediately, softer. "Yes, I'm here now. No, he's not home. I don't know. Maybe he got held up." She was talking to him. Foster. David squeezed the grip of his revolver. "Of course I'll call you when I get off," Catherine continued. "I love you too." Those words, "I love you," finally decided everything. David felt a strange calmness, as if he had entered a trance. Everything became very clear. He would wait until she was back in touch with Foster. Catch them talking. Let the lover see and hear everything. It would be only fair. David made his way to the bedroom and closed the door silently behind him. Now all one has to do is wait. Catherine spent about an hour in the house. David could hear her walking around the rooms, packing, occasionally talking on the phone, short, mundane phrases. Once she came to the bedroom door, stood for a few seconds, but didn't dare enter. He sat motionless in a chair by the window, clutching the handle of a revolver in the pocket of his dressing gown. At 8:30, the front door slammed. Catherine left. David waited another 20 minutes, then came out of the bedroom. There was an envelope on the kitchen table, divorce papers, and a short note. "Call me when you're ready to discuss." He crumpled the paper and tossed it in the trash. For the next 2 days, David lived in a strange state of detachment. He shopped for groceries, cooked meals, watched TV, everything as usual, but as if watching himself from the sidelines. The GPS beacon showed that Catherine was still living at Foster's. She went to work on Monday and Tuesday, returning to his apartment in the evenings. On Wednesday morning, the red dot moved in an unexpected direction, toward their house. David was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee when he heard the sound of a key in the lock. He didn't move, continuing to stare into the void in front of him. "David?" Catherine entered the kitchen cautiously. "You weren't at work, and I was worried." He looked up slowly. She looked good, fresh, rested, with a new hairdo. Happy. "As you can see, I'm fine." His voice sounded hoarse from the long silence. "You didn't answer calls or texts. Didn't see the point." Catherine sighed and sat down across from him. "We need to talk. Resolve things in a civilized manner." "Civilized." He repeated the word with a bitter chuckle. "Of course." "David, please don't make this any harder than it has to be. We both know our marriage is long over." "We do?" He leaned forward. "I didn't know. It came as a surprise to me." "Not true." She shook her head. "We haven't been truly happy in years. After all that trying with the baby, something broke between us." "I loved you," David said simply. "Always." "I know." Regret flashed in her eyes. "And I loved you too, but that wasn't enough." They talked for another hour or so, about the past, about unfulfilled hopes, about how to separate with minimum losses for both of them. Catherine was calm and rational. She had obviously prepared for this conversation. David listened, sometimes asked questions, even agreed with some points, but a strange, cold feeling was building up inside him. "Will you live with him?" he asked when she was about to leave. Catherine hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes. Michael asked me to move in with him permanently." "Do you love him?" "David, it doesn't matter." "It does to me." He looked her straight in the eye. "Do you love him more than you loved me?" "I won't discuss it." She looked away. "Goodbye, David. I hope you find your happiness." When the door closed behind her, David sat still for a long time. Then he rose slowly and went into the bedroom. The revolver was in the drawer of the bedside table, wrapped in a clean towel. On Friday, David returned to work. His colleagues were understanding of his short absence. He said he was sick. The day passed in the usual cares, and no one noticed that David Morgan has changed. That under the mask of a calm professional now hid a completely different person. In the evening, he checked the GPS tracker. Catherine hadn't gone to work today. The red dot had stayed in Foster's apartment all day. For a moment, David imagined them spending the day together, maybe lying in bed, laughing, making plans for the future. Plans that had no room for him. Something finally broke inside David at that moment. He took out the revolver, wrapped it in a soft cloth, and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he got into his car and drove to Foster's house. Parking 2 blocks away, David walked slowly down the evening street, looking up at the 4th-floor windows. The lights were on and the curtains were pulled open. He saw the silhouettes of 2 people. The concierge at the entrance nodded to him like an old acquaintance. David had come here often in recent days, introducing himself as a friend of the professor. "Good evening. Is Michael home?" David asked with a smile. "Yes, sir. Went up about an hour ago." "That's great. I won't be long, just returning a book." The concierge nodded and went back to watching the small TV behind the counter. David went up to the 4th floor and stopped in front of the door of apartment number 412. Muffled voices and music came from there. They were having dinner or watching a movie. Just an ordinary night out for an ordinary couple. He raised his hand to knock but dropped it at the last moment. No, not like this. It would have to be done differently. Going downstairs, David stepped outside and walked around the building. Behind the building was a small courtyard with balconies overlooking it. The balcony of apartment 412 was at the level of the fire escape. David looked around. The courtyard was empty, all the neighboring windows dark or with their curtains drawn. He jumped up, grabbed the bottom rung of the fire escape, and pulled himself up. The gym 3 times a week for the last 10 years had paid off. He was in excellent physical shape. Silently, he climbed the metal steps and found himself on the level of Foster's balcony. The glass door was ajar, the evening was warm, and they were airing out the apartment. David cautiously peered inside. The large, stylish living room was lit by a few table lamps. There were 2 wine glasses and a plate of fruit on the coffee table. A huge television on the wall was showing some kind of movie with the sound off. Catherine and Foster were out of sight, but there were voices coming from the next room. David slipped quietly through the balcony door and froze behind a drape. "I can't tonight," Catherine was saying. "I have to prepare for the presentation tomorrow." "Just for half an hour." Foster's voice was low and insistent. "My mother will not rest until she speaks to you in person." "On the phone? Now?" "On a video link. She's old-fashioned, but she's got Facetime down." He laughed. "I promise it won't take long." David tensed. Were they going to call Foster's mother? Introduce Catherine as the new girlfriend? "Okay," Catherine sighed. "Just for a little while, and I need to comb my hair." "You look beautiful." Foster appeared in the doorway, holding Catherine's hand. He was in a homemade t-shirt and jeans, barefoot, completely relaxed in his apartment. "She's going to love you." They sat down on the couch, and Foster pulled out his phone. David could see the backs of their heads. Michael's dark-haired head was almost touching Catherine's reddish hair. She was nervously adjusting her blouse and hair. "Don't worry." Foster put his arm around her shoulders. "It's just my mom, not the Inquisition. It's just all so strange." Catherine shook her head. "Meeting your family when my divorce is still pending. It's a formality." He kissed her on the temple. "You've already made your decision. The papers are ready. A month or 2 and it'll be official. If David signs the papers..." "He will," Foster said firmly. "What are his options?" David gripped the revolver tighter in his pocket. "What are his options? They're about to find out. Let's do it tomorrow after all, shall we?" Catherine looked uncertain. "I'm really not ready." "Mom's waiting." Foster was already dialing. She'd cleared the evening on purpose. The phone screen lit up and the dial tone sounded. David slowly, silently came out of his hiding place, keeping his hand in his jacket pocket. "Hi, Mom," Foster waved cheerfully at the camera. "Look who I want to introduce to you." The face of an older woman with hair as dark as her son's, touched with gray, appeared on the screen. "Hello, Mrs. Foster." Catherine's voice sounded unnaturally high. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "You too, dear." The woman smiled as she regarded them. "Michael has told me so much about you. At last I get to see this mysterious Catherine." David took another step. Now he was standing just behind the couch, looking at the backs of his ex-wife's and her lovers' heads. "Catherine works at a PR agency, Mom," Foster said. "She's incredibly talented." "That's an exaggeration," Catherine smiled embarrassedly. "I'm just doing my job." "Don't be modest, dear." The older woman on the screen leaned closer. "Michael says you're a real professional, and very beautiful, I see." Foster put his arm around Catherine's shoulders and pulled her close to him. "Mom, I'm really happy with her." "That's the main thing, son," the woman nodded. "After your divorce, I was afraid you'd become withdrawn. I'm glad to see you smiling again." David felt a wave of rage rising inside. They had discussed their happiness, made plans, met relatives, while his life lay in ruins. "Mrs. Foster," Catherine began, but suddenly froze. She saw David's reflection in the phone screen. "David?" She turned around slowly. Foster, sensing something amiss, turned around as well. "What the hell?" He jumped up from the couch. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "David, what are you doing here?" Catherine's voice shook. "What's going on?" the woman on the screen asked worriedly. "Michael?" David slowly pulled a revolver from his pocket. Foster took a step back, blocking Catherine's view. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you'd better leave." His voice was strained but determined. "You don't know who I am?" David grinned crookedly. "Ask her. Ask my wife." Foster cast a quick glance at Catherine, who stood pale as a sheet. "David, please." She held up her hands in a conciliatory gesture. "Let's talk. Just put the gun down." "Michael, what's going on?" Foster's mother sounded terrified. "Who is this man?" "Mom, I'll call you back." Foster didn't take his eyes off the gun in David's hand. "I'm Catherine's husband." David said directly into the camera phone that Foster was still holding. "You're talking to the woman who betrayed me, who destroyed our family for your son." "Oh my God," the woman exhaled. "Michael, call the police." "David, calm down." Foster spoke softly and measuredly, as if he were talking to a dangerous animal. "Let's talk this through, like adults." "Like adults?" David laughed. "How do adults discuss betrayal? How do adults divide a woman?" "I'm not a thing to be divided." Catherine's voice had steel in it. "I make my own decisions, and I chose to leave you." "To him," David nodded at Foster. "The man who destroyed our family." "Our family was destroyed by us." She shook her head. "Michael had nothing to do with it. You and I stopped being a family long before he did." David pointed the revolver at Foster. "Get away from her." "No." The professor didn't move. "I'm not leaving her alone with an armed man." "You're brave, aren't you?" David squinted. "A real knight in shining armor, saving a lady from an evil dragon." At that moment, Catherine made a sudden movement, trying to push Foster out of the line of fire. He didn't expect it, and staggered, the phone falling out of his hands to the floor. The connection didn't break. Foster's mother could still see and hear what was happening, but now the camera was filming their feet and part of the room. "Michael!" screamed the woman. "What's going on?" "David, please." Catherine took a step forward. "Put the gun down, and we'll talk calmly. You don't want to do something you'll regret for the rest of your life." "Regret?" He shook his head. "I already regret a lot of things. About not seeing you change, about believing every word you said, that I wasted 13 years with a woman who could betray you so easily." "I didn't betray you." Her voice trembled. "I just stopped loving you. It happens, David, to millions of couples all over the world. Not to us." He shook his head. "We were special. We were one." At that moment, the phone on the floor vibrated, an incoming call interrupting a video link to Foster's mother. A name popped up on the screen. "Emergency services." "She called the police." Foster straightened up. "They're on their way. You'd better leave before it gets worse." "Worse?" David laughed. "What could be worse?" He shifted the revolver to Catherine. "You think I'm going to let you just walk away? Start a new life with him while I'm alone remembering our past?" "David, no!" Foster lunged forward, trying to block Catherine's view. The gunshot rang unexpectedly loud in the confined space of the apartment. Catherine cried out and recoiled, clutching her shoulder. The bullet had grazed her, but not fatally. Foster punched David in the chest, trying to dislodge the weapon, but slipped on the phone lying on the floor. David took a step back, took a breath, and took aim again. Catherine, clutching the bleeding wound with her hand, looked at him with wide-open eyes. "Please, David," she whispered. "Don't do this. You made your choice." He shook his head. "Now I'm making mine." The second shot was more accurate. Catherine fell on her back, a look of surprise on her face, as if she hadn't believed until the last moment that this was really happening. Foster rushed to her with a scream, falling to his knees beside her. The phone on the floor came to life again. This time the face of an emergency dispatcher appeared on the screen, trying to contact them. "Emergency services. What's going on?" David slowly lowered his weapon. A strange numbness swept over him. He watched Foster trying to stop the blood pouring from Catherine's head wound, helplessly repeating her name, tears rolling down his face. "Apartment 412!" Foster shouted into the phone. "Hurry! She's hurt! There's been a shooting!" David took a step back, then another. He could have left now, down the fire escape, out a side exit, lost in the city before the police arrived. But instead, he just sat down in a chair against the wall and put the revolver in his lap. He stared at Catherine's pale face, at her reddish hair strewn across the floor, at the blurring red stain around her head. All 13 years of their life together flashed before his eyes. First date, proposal, wedding, buying a house, traveling, trying to have a child, gradual estrangement, and then this finale, which neither of them could have foreseen. He didn't even resist when the police burst into the apartment 7 minutes later with guns at the ready. He calmly raised his hands, allowed himself to be handcuffed, answered the first questions: name, address, attitude to the victim. "She's my wife," David said in a tired, lifeless voice. was my wife. Medics fussed around Catherine, but he already knew it was too late. The shot had been fatal, in the temple, at close range. Some paramedics worked on Catherine's body, while others tried to calm Foster, who was in a state of shock, with bloody hands and a face contorted with grief. Police officers led David out of the apartment. Neighbors gathered in the hallway, curious, frightened, filming what was happening on their phones. Some shouted curses at him, others shook their heads in silence. He was unaffected. It wasn't until he was sitting in the back of the police car, looking at the flashing red and blue lights of ambulances and patrol cars, that David realized for the first time what he had done. That he had lost not only Catherine, but himself. The person he had been all these years no longer existed. The thought caused him no fear or regret, only emptiness. An endless void that nothing could fill.